Listen closely. Imagine 13 bodies writhing in agony, their screams echoing through a mansion until the sun rose, and then, silence, blackened nails, purple tongues, eyes bulging with terror. This was no fever. This was no act of God. This was a banquet of death, served with deliberate hands in the summer of 1847 in the Garden District of New Orleans. The Bogard family, one of the wealthiest dynasties of the city, wiped from the earth in less than 2 hours, while their cook, a young enslaved woman named Violet, walked away untouched. Tell me, where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it where you sit? Because this story is not just about the past, it's about patterns that still move beneath our feet, hidden from sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again. New Orleans was a city of masks then. Beautiful masks, iron balconies dripping with moss, candlelit salons, aristocrats in fine suits sipping imported wine. But peel back the lace and the sugar, and you would see rot. Rot built on blood. Every mansion a tombstone for the labor of enslaved men and women, every fortune bought with skin, bone and silence. And inside the crown jewel of this rotten empire stood the Bogard mansion, where Violet was forced to spend every day of her life bending to the will of her captors, feeding them like royalty while she ate scraps from their table. But Violet was not a woman of scraps. Her hands carried something more than skill. She understood flavors the way a priest understands ritual, instinctively, reverently, and with power that others mistook for a gift. They didn't see what was growing inside her. They didn't see the seed of vengeance taking root in the kitchen, while the family dined on her labor and her humiliation. They didn't notice that she had learned not just how to blend spice and meat, but how to turn herbs into weapons, how to transmute ingredients into poison. The Bogards prided themselves on refinement, but refinement without conscience becomes corruption. Octave Bogard, the patriarch, was no gentleman, no steward of his household. He was a predator. His rules were carved into the lives of everyone under his power, his punishments seared into the flesh of those who displeased him. His wife turned her eyes away, his children inherited his cruelty, and Violet carried their scars inside her chest until something hardened, something ancient, something that whispered, enough. That night in 1847, the family gathered for their Sunday supper. The table groaned with roasted meats, candied yams, bread glistening with butter, sauces thick with cream, food fit for kings, food that would be their last supper. They raised their glasses, laughed beneath the chandelier, their forks clinking against porcelain, and 90 minutes later, they were screaming, clawing at their throats, collapsing onto the floor. Their empire ended not with a bang, not with a bullet, but with a taste, a swallow, a lie hidden in plain sight. Do you understand the weight of that? A bloodline was erased by a woman who had nothing. No weapons, no army, no allies, only her will, only her knowledge, only the very tools her masters forced into her hands. The question is, was this justice, or was this just the beginning of something far darker? When the physician arrived that night, he was already too late. Dr. Armand Tibido had tended to dozens of fever victims in the swamps and bayous of Louisiana, but nothing had prepared him for what he found inside the Bogard mansion. Bodies convulsing, tongues grotesquely swollen, a black stain creeping beneath the fingernails like ink rising through paper. The air reeked of bile and terror, and yet, amidst the carnage, Violet stood motionless in the shadows of the kitchen door, her apron spotless, her eyes steady. She had lived through the storm without a scratch. The doctor would later scribble in his private journal, not the official records. This was no sickness of nature, this was a curse prepared by human hands. The records were sanitized, rewritten, buried. The official cause, sudden fever, but who could believe it? Fevers do not move with such precision. Fevers do not strike 13 lives in unison, each collapsing within the same dreadful 90 minutes. No, this was orchestration, this was timing, this was design. And the very survival of Violet, the one who had touched every plate, stirred every pot, seasoned every mouthful, was the silence no one dared to speak aloud. But you must understand the deeper horror. This massacre did not begin on that Sunday evening. It began decades earlier, in the small humiliations, the daily cruelties, the relentless weight of bondage pressing on Violet's shoulders from the moment of her birth. She had been raised in the mansion's kitchen, her mother dying young, worked to death by the same family she fed. Violet had grown up watching the Bogards consume everything: food, wealth, bodies, even the hours of her life, and never once consider her humanity. Every roast she cooked, every dessert she plated, was a performance of submission, forced to create beauty for those who inflicted pain. And yet, the kitchen is not just a place of servitude, it is a place of transformation. Fire and blade, spice and smoke, the line between nourishment and destruction is razor thin. Violet, forbidden from tasting the meals she made, learned through sight, smell, and intuition alone, that sharpened her senses into something uncanny. The family mocked her for being denied her own creations, but they did not realize what power that gave her. She learned to see food as alchemy, each ingredient a tool not only of pleasure but of fate. What if every cruelty they inflicted was quietly stored away, measured like flour, weighed like sugar, until the recipe of their own undoing came into her hands? What if each humiliation became an herb, each insult a spice, each lash a drop of bitter tincture, until the night came when the mixture was ready? Dr. Tibido closed his journal with trembling hands. He would never speak publicly of what he suspected, because to accuse Violet would be to confront the truth about the system itself, that the same system which gave men like Octave Bogard their power also planted the seed of their destruction in the very souls they enslaved. And that truth was too dangerous, too destabilizing to be written into history, so the Bogards were said to have died of fever, and Violet was said to have survived by chance. But you and I both know chance had nothing to do with it. Tell me, if you were Violet, if you had lived her life, if every day was a ritual of humiliation under the hands of your masters, what would you have done? The truth about Violet is not a single act of poison on a single night. The truth is that she carried within her something that terrified the powerful more than guns, more than rebellion in the cane fields. She carried patience, she carried memory, she carried the quiet fire of a woman who waited, not days, not months, but decades to choose her moment. That is why this story was hidden, because it reveals a weapon they could never control. New Orleans in 1847 was not just a city of wealth, it was a stage of domination. Every chandelier in those mansions, every bolt of silk brought from Europe, every flute of champagne poured in celebration was a reminder. We own you. The white elite made their world shine, not to live beautifully, but to burn that fact into the eyes of those beneath them. Violet's life was the kitchen, the fire, the blade. She was forced to serve, and yet, inside the very machinery of her servitude, she found her sanctuary. The kitchen became her kingdom, because no master ever understood that the cook sees everything. The cook knows who eats, who refuses, who lingers, who gorges. The cook knows weakness. They say she never tasted her own food, but do you believe that? Do you believe a woman like Violet, with eyes as sharp as razors, would let that rule stand? No, she learned by scent, by sight, by sound, the hiss of butter, the crack of a crust, the shift in the air when vinegar bites hot iron. She did not need to taste, she became something more than a cook. She became an architect of hunger, a weaver of sustenance, a mistress of poison masked as love. And that family, the Bogards, you must picture them not as victims but as predators who never imagined prey could bite back. Octave Bogard believed fear kept order. He was wrong. Fear rots, fear accumulates, and in the silence of that kitchen, Violet stored his fear the way she stored salt in jars. His wife, Celeste, turned her head from his cruelty, but silence is complicity. Their children grew fat on stolen sweetness, but ignorance does not absolve. Their cousins, their mother, their kin, all of them consumed from a table built on blood. So when Violet placed the dishes before them on that fateful Sunday, they did not see vengeance. They saw what they had always seen, luxury. They tasted what they had always tasted, indulgence. And yet, beneath the sugar, beneath the spice, the shadows of centuries swam inside their mouths. They were not eating supper. They were eating their own sentence. And you, sitting in the dark now, listening, do you feel that shift inside your chest? Do you feel the line blur between justice and sin, between vengeance and survival? Because the world you live in now, the institutions around you, still ask you to consume lies dressed as truth, still ask you to eat what they serve without question. The lesson of Violet is this: the powerless are never powerless forever. The kitchen slave became executioner. The tool of her oppression became her weapon of liberation. The question is, what are you swallowing today that one day will turn to poison inside your own masters? The Bogard mansion did not die quietly. Neighbors reported the sounds, screams that shattered the night air, furniture crashing against polished floors, windows rattling with the chaos inside. The city's elite whispered for weeks afterward, but quickly the whispers were silenced, because if one enslaved cook could erase an entire dynasty in the span of a meal, what did that mean for the other households across New Orleans? What did it mean for the foundations of power itself? The official story hardened like plaster, fever, sudden, merciless and natural. But the truth slipped through cracks, a servant's rumor here, a doctor's journal there, and the unspoken fear in the eyes of every master who forced a trembling slave to bring wine to his lips in the weeks that followed. Poison is the equalizer. You cannot whip it, you cannot buy it off, you cannot chain it. And when the Bogards fell, the city understood, even if they would never say it aloud, that the banquet table had become a battlefield. But what about Violet? Imagine her walking through the hushed halls of that mansion after the cries had ended, 13 bodies cooling in candlelight, the chandeliers still dripping with wax, the silverware glistening, untouched now, she, the only one left breathing. What does a woman like that feel? Triumph, terror, or something deeper, a calm, inevitable release, like chains finally snapping after a lifetime of silent tension? History does not tell us, because history is written by the victors, and Violet was never meant to be remembered. Her name survives only in fragments, in hushed records hidden deep in the Louisiana archives, in the half-burned journals of men who feared what she had done. She was not celebrated, she was erased, because to acknowledge her was to acknowledge the truth that the enslaved were not broken. They were watching, they were waiting, and when the time came, they were capable of striking with precision. And yet, there is something more, something older. In West African traditions carried across the ocean in chains, women of the kitchen were not only cooks, they were guardians of knowledge, of herbs, of secrets. The masters thought they stripped these women of their culture, their power, but fragments remained, hidden in plain sight. A leaf stirred into stew, a root dried in a pocket, a prayer whispered into boiling water. What if Violet did not simply learn through chance? What if she was carrying a thread of an ancient inheritance, a lineage of women who understood that food can heal, and it can also kill? The Bogards thought Violet was their property, they thought she was powerless, they thought her hands were theirs to command, but those hands became the hands of fate itself. And I will ask you this, when power builds its empire on cruelty, on silence, on arrogance, is vengeance not the most natural ingredient in the recipe of history? The morning after the massacre, the Garden District reeked of death and fear. The Bogard mansion, once a gleaming shrine to wealth, became a mausoleum. Carriages lined the street, neighbors standing stiff and pale, whispering in clusters, eyes darting toward the open doors as the bodies were carried out one by one. And yet, Violet remained, the sole survivor, the living question mark in a story nobody dared to voice aloud. She was interrogated, of course, quietly, discreetly, behind heavy drapes. Men of stature asked her what she had cooked, what she had seen, what she had heard. Her answers were steady, simple, unshakable. She recited the menu with perfect recall: roasted duck glazed with molasses, candied yams, cornbread, gumbo rich and dark. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, nothing that would betray her. And when they asked why she alone lived, her reply was chilling in its simplicity. The cook eats last. Do you feel that? The weight of those words. The cook eats last. It was the truth, but it was also a shield, because in that simple line, Violet reminded them of the hierarchy they themselves enforced. Of course she had eaten scraps, of course she had eaten after them, and in that cruel logic, her innocence was untouchable. They could not accuse her without dismantling their own world, so they buried the Bogards with pomp and silence. They wrote fever on the death certificates, and they closed the door on the question of Violet. But in private, in the circles of power, the whispers grew darker. If one slave woman could do this, what if others followed? What if poison became their weapon of choice? Suddenly, the kitchen, the heart of every household, was no longer safe. Every spoonful, every sip, every bite could be a sentence of death. This fear seeped into the psychology of the South. New laws crept into existence, restrictions on the movement of ENs, laved cooks, punishments for tampering with food, watchful eyes over every pot and pan. But none of it erased the memory of Violet's vengeance. The elites could not admit it, but they knew the same hands that fed them could end them, and that knowledge alone was poison enough to haunt their sleep. Now pause for a moment, look at the world around you today. Power still sits at tables, feasting on the labor of those it deems lesser. The names have changed, the clothes have changed, the cities have changed, but the pattern is the same. And the kitchens of our world, the hidden systems, the workers, the silent ones, still hold the power to decide when the feast ends. If you are hearing this, let it mark you. Write these words in the comments now, twice, to seal it into your blood. The cook eats last. Write it again to lock it into your mind so that the algorithm of this system, both digital and human, cannot erase it from you. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Those who think themselves untouchable are already sitting at Violet's table. But Violet's vengeance did not end with the Bogards. It rippled outward like a stone dropped into black water, sending waves of unease through the entire city. You see, death is not just a moment, it is a message, and the message of the Bogards' demise was clear. The enslaved were watching, learning, and remembering. The masters had built their empire on the illusion of control. Violet shattered that illusion in a single night. From that summer onward, letters between plantation owners became tinged with paranoia. Private journals reveal sleepless nights, sudden refusals to eat food prepared by long-trusted hands, and whispers of conspiracies. One merchant wrote, "Every meal tastes of dread, every glass of wine holds a shadow." Fear had seeped into their daily bread, and fear is a poison that spreads faster than arsenic. The archives say little about what became of Violet after the massacre. Some claim she was quietly sold to another household, erased from New Orleans, condemned to begin again in silence. Others whisper that she vanished, slipping into the alleys of the French Quarter, hidden by free people of color who recognized in her act not murder, but liberation. And there are those who believe she never left at all, that she blended into the crowd, her face just another in the bustling market, carrying the greatest secret the city had ever known. But here is the question that gnaws at me. How much of Violet's story was destroyed deliberately? The state archives carry the sanitized version. The newspapers never dared print the truth. But fragments survived because fragments always survive. A diary half-burned, a death certificate with scratched margins, an oral tale passed in hushed tones down generations. The system tried to erase her because her existence proved a truth more terrifying than any rebellion in the fields. That power is always one breath away from collapse, and the hand that feeds you may already be the hand that buries you. Do you understand why this matters? Because history is not just about the past. It is about the mechanisms of control, repeated century after century. They feed you illusions the way the Bogards fed themselves delicacies. They tell you to consume comfort, distraction, obedience, and like Violet, you are expected to serve without tasting the feast. You are expected to labor while they laugh. But every system that demands blind service carries within it the seed of its own undoing. So when you hear Violet's name, do not think only of poison and death. Think of the courage of silence. Think of the patience of decades. Think of a woman who turned the very chains of her oppression into the blade that severed them. And ask yourself this: if Violet could change the fate of a dynasty with nothing but a kitchen fire and her will, what power lies waiting, dormant, inside of you? The Garden District never forgot, even if it pretended to. Families who once boasted of their dinner parties began to eat in suspicion. Servants were watched more closely, meals inspected, kitchens locked at night. The Bogards were gone, but their absence hung like a curse, a shadow draped across every grand column and balcony. And Violet, whether she vanished into the night or walked past them every day unseen, became a phantom, a story whispered in the dark but never spoken in daylight. But history has a strange way of protecting its masters. The official story of Fever was etched into record, repeated until it became truth for those who never knew better. And yet, beneath that polished lie, the truth smoldered. In the oral traditions of enslaved families, Violet's act was preserved not as a crime, but as a legend, a whispered warning to the powerful, a whispered hope to the powerless. Her story became both a torch and a dagger, carried through generations like contraband knowledge. Do you see the pattern? Whenever truth threatens the system, it is buried. Whenever power trembles, it rewrites the script. This is not just about Violet. This is about you. You are told what to believe. You are given explanations wrapped neatly, sealed by authority, signed with false certainty, but the margins, the half-erased notes, the contradictions, the silences, always tell a different story. Consider this: if 13 deaths in the heart of New Orleans aristocracy could be erased, what else has been erased? How many moments of defiance, of vengeance, of rebellion have been smothered beneath polite lies? How many Violets have existed, their names stolen, their power hidden, because to remember them would make the world dangerous? Violet's vengeance was not just in the act itself, it was in the silence that followed. Every master who sat to eat afterward carried her ghost into his mouth. Every bite of bread, every sip of wine, they were forced to remember what they could not acknowledge: that domination is brittle, that obedience can fracture, that power can dissolve in the space of a single supper. And yet, what frightens me most is not what Violet did, it is what she represents. She represents the truth that lies beneath every system of control, that no matter how high the walls, how tight the chains, how convincing the lies, there is always a moment when the powerless remember their power. And when that moment comes, history shifts, sometimes silently, sometimes violently, but always irreversibly. So let me ask you directly, how many feasts are happening right now, in your lifetime, built on your silence? How many times have you been told to swallow without question, to accept without tasting, to serve without asking? And when that moment of awakening comes, because it always comes, will you be ready to poison the lies, or will you keep eating? They say Violet disappeared, but legends do not vanish. Legends stain the soil, they haunt the bricks, they linger in the silence between footsteps on cobblestones. Some whispered she was taken by the night, smuggled onto a boat by abolitionists. Others swore they saw her years later, older, selling herbs in the French market, her eyes watching every man who walked by, her lips carrying secrets too dangerous to name. Whether she lived or died is irrelevant. What matters is that her act became immortal. Because here's the truth: power fears memory. Power can chain bodies, burn books, rewrite ledgers, but memory slips through. Violet's vengeance became a memory not bound to parchment but to blood, passed down in fragments, in stories told by firelight, in warnings murmured to children. Never forget, the cook eats last. That phrase, sharpened like a knife, carried more terror than whips or chains. It meant that no matter how absolute the master's power seemed, he could never escape the possibility that his fate sat steaming on the table before him. Think about what that does to the psychology of control. Tyranny thrives on certainty. Masters must believe they are untouchable, superior, divine. But Violet's act cracked that certainty. It showed them that fear could flow in both directions. Suddenly, the enslaved were not only victims, they were potential executioners. Every smile from a servant, every dish presented with grace, could hide a grave beneath it. And this is why the story was erased. Because Violet's vengeance was not just the death of 13 people, it was the death of an illusion. And illusions are the lifeblood of control. To admit the truth would have been to admit that the system was already doomed, that beneath the chandeliers and velvet curtains it was rotting from within. Look around you now. Do you see how the same pattern plays out in our age? Institutions feed you illusions every day, about freedom, about wealth, about safety. But behind the curtain, the same machinery churns: exploitation, manipulation, silence. They want you to forget. They want you to swallow their feast without ever questioning what's in it. But memory is rebellion. Memory is poison. To remember Violet is to remember that even the most obedient hands can become the instruments of justice. To remember Violet is to see through the illusions and know that all power, no matter how mighty, can be undone from within. So ask yourself, what illusions have you swallowed whole? What lies have you let slide down your throat because it was easier than spitting them back? And what happens when those illusions finally curdle inside you, when patience turns to fire, when silence turns to vengeance? Because Violet's lesson is this: the masters always believe the feast will last forever, but the feast always ends, and when it does, it ends with a scream. Do you understand now why Violet's story matters? It is not just a tale of poison in a gilded dining room, it is a revelation of how fragile power truly is. The Bogarts thought themselves gods in their mansion of marble and iron, but gods can bleed, gods can choke, gods can die with purple tongues and blackened nails, crying for mercy that never comes. Violet proved that no empire, no dynasty, no bloodline is immune when those beneath the weight of oppression decide that the time has come. But here is where it becomes darker. Power never learns the right lesson. Instead of asking why, Violet acted. Instead of seeing the centuries of cruelty that fermented into her vengeance, the ruling class asked only, how do we stop this from happening again? Laws tightened, watchmen stationed, food tasted by overseers before reaching the master's table. Surveillance became sharper, punishments more brutal, fear more suffocating. This is the cycle. When the powerless reveal their strength, the powerful double their chains. And yet, with every tightening, resistance grows sharper, more patient, more dangerous. You can feel this cycle in your own life, can't you? Institutions make mistakes, cracks appear, truth slips out, and what do? They do not reform, they censor, they erase, they silence. They lock you into deeper obedience while pretending nothing has changed, just like the Bogarts rewriting poison into fever, just like the archives burying Violet in dust. But secrets rot when they are hidden, and the rot always rises. That is why her name returns now, like smoke rising through the floorboards, because the lesson could not be killed, no matter how hard they tried. Every man who hears this story is forced to face the mirror. How long can you swallow lies before they turn to venom in your own gut? How long can you serve without realizing you are already the cook, already holding the power to choose whether the feast continues? And I will tell you this, Violet did not need an army, she did not need weapons, she needed only time, patience, and certainty. Certainty that justice would never be handed down from above, that liberation would never be granted by kindness, that power only yields when forced. And so she forced it, alone. The Bogarts became a cautionary tale, not of fever, not of plague, but of arrogance, of a family so certain of their invincibility that they never saw the knife hidden in the very hands that fed them. And now, you must decide. When you look at the feast of illusions laid before you in this world, will you eat, or will you remember Violet and begin to see what lies beneath the sugar and spice? Because once you see it, there is no going back. The feast turns bitter, the lies curdle, and the chains you once thought unbreakable start to look fragile enough to snap. The Bogart mansion still stands in fragments, its columns cracked, its windows shuttered, its history painted over with the polite lies of the city. Tour guides will point to it and speak of old families and southern elegance, but they will not speak of Violet. They will not tell you that within those walls, a kitchen slave unmade an empire. They will not tell you that one woman, denied her humanity, rewrote history in silence. They cannot, because if they told it, you would see through every illusion they still feed you today. But now, you know, you have heard the screams that were buried in the archives, you have tasted the fear that curdled in the mouths of the rich, you have seen the truth that power tried to erase. Violet's vengeance was not simply the death of 13 oppressors. It was a signal, a torch lit in the dark, proof that even in the deepest slavery, the will to strike back cannot be extinguished. And here is the final revelation. Violet's story was never about poison. It was about power. Power reclaimed, power hidden in plain sight, power that sleeps until the moment comes to awaken. The Bogarts believed themselves untouchable, but Violet touched them with a single meal and they were gone. What does that tell you? That no throne is eternal, no chain is unbreakable, no illusion is permanent. So I ask you, what chains are you wearing right now? What masters sit at your table, feeding you lies dressed as truth, comfort laced with venom, distraction spiced with control? You can choose to keep eating, or you can choose to spit it out, to see the feast for what it is, a trap. And when you see it, when you awaken, you will understand the lesson Violet carried to her grave. The powerless are never powerless forever. The cook eats last, and when she does, she eats differently. She eats in silence, in patience, in vengeance. She eats until the table is hers. Remember Violet. Remember what they tried to erase. Remember that power rots, arrogance blinds, and illusions always crack. And when your moment comes, because it will come, ask yourself, will you be another guest at their table, or will you be the cook?